It's time to hop into the wrestling multiverse and explore the different events that could have unfolded had future megastars opted to keep their mouths shut on buses, icons not been toppled at massive events, or things worked out differently for WWE's competition. Because I am Gareth, this is What Culture Wrestling, and here are some what-if scenarios that would have transformed WWE history. AEW is never created. Had this all-elite alternative never been unleashed, there's a strong chance WWE would have simply continued churning out the sort of lazy, half-assed content that had made much of the last decade or so one of the bleakest eras sports entertainment has ever known. Outside of the unexpected rise of the man Becky Lynch and Kofi Kingston, fans weren't exactly spoiled for choice when it came to captivating storylines, must-see pay-per-views, or even half-decent contests in between the ropes pre-AEW. WWE were in soul-crushing autopilot mode, and with no competition forcing them to pull their finger out, or at least make a still routinely baffling Vince McMahon-booked product occasionally sensational, the biggest wrestling organization on the planet would have no doubt continued doing the bare minimum, as folks gradually continued to be turned off the stale product. Without a successful alternative to hop over to, some of the company's hottest stars likely wouldn't have been as happy to let their contracts run down, or quick to ask for their release either. Just think of the stars that could possibly still be in WWE right now. Brock Lesnar stays after WrestleMania 20. In the wake of two absolute monsters colliding in a rather underwhelming showdown inside of Madison Square Garden back in 2004, WWE was left with one hell of a hole at the top of the card. And while Big Bill Goldberg's exit was certainly felt, Vince McMahon evidently wasn't trying to build his company around the man at that point in his career. Brock Lesnar's shocking departure, on the other hand, likely forced one hell of a rethink for the WWE chairman. Had the clear future of the company not decided he'd had enough of the WWE schedule and tried his hand at being an American football player or MMA fighter, there's probably a world where some of the biggest stars of the ruthless aggression era, Cena, Batista, Orton, you know the ones, didn't get anywhere near as many opportunities to climb to the top of the mountain as they eventually did. But had Brock not ultimately ended up kicking all of the ass within the octagon, then perhaps he would have never fully grown into the sort of undisputed box office attraction fans still line up to experience today too. The real WCW stars invade. Whatever way you slice it, WWE's invasion storyline royally sucked. And while the unwanted McMahon family drama and baffling Stone Cold Steve Austin heel turns definitely didn't help, the key reason the entire thing fell flat had something to do with the specific WCW stars who ended up doing said invading. Had Vince actually bothered to cough up the cash to buy out the massive Time Warner deals the likes of Sting, the NWO, and Goldberg were signed to at the time, these huge WCW stars wouldn't have spent the entire invasion angle sitting at home earning dollar for doing nada. Instead, they would have helped make wrestling fans all over the world's dreams come true, rather than witnessing talented but nowhere near as popular WCW figures like Lance Storm, DDP, Booker T, and Rhino frustratingly invade their longtime rivals' product, the Icon going one-on-one with The Undertaker, the NWO colliding with stars like The Rock, Kurt Angle, and Kane, and Stone Cold butting bald heads with The Man could have helped transform this infamous storyline into one of the greatest of all time. Ronda Rousey never left the UFC. Both the world-class Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair definitely played significant roles in firing the women's division into the main event of WrestleMania for the very first time. But were it not for one particular UFC fighter deciding to turn her back on MMA and join the wrestling world, there's a good chance that massive moment in WWE history wouldn't have happened at the time it did. Make no mistake, WWE's women's revolution was obviously already well underway before Ronda Rousey decided to strut down the ramp at the 2018 Royal Rumble. The four horsewomen were stealing show of shows, Asuka was in the middle of an impressive winning streak, and NXT was continually producing exciting new names to throw up to the main roster, only for Vince McMahon to regularly lose interest in them within a few months or weeks. However, without Ronnie bringing a ton of new eyes to the product, and the crossover superstar rapidly becoming one of the most must-see parts of the WWE product, fans would have probably had to have waited a few more years before an all-women's contest went on last at the biggest show of the year. Now, I've got a quick question for you while we're talking about Ronda. What is your favorite Ronda Rousey match in WWE? You let me know in the comment section right down below. The Undertaker's streak survives WrestleMania 30. Brock Lesnar's conquering of an iconic streak made an already intimidating wrestler wrestler feel pretty much unstoppable. But what if The Undertaker didn't lose his perfect show of shows record at WrestleMania 30? What if, as many honestly expected and a ton of fans still argue should have gone down to this day, that honor went to an up-and-coming performer instead? Just imagine if WWE really fancied embracing the idea of a fully heel Roman Reigns back at WrestleMania 33, for example. The big dog putting down the dead man in Florida would have been the perfect fuel to generate years of intentional nuclear heat for the arrogant yard owner in the time before going full tribal chief. Someone like the late supernatural force that was Bray Wyatt would have also hugely benefited from defeating a street-boasting phenom on the grandest stage too, instead of being disappointingly fed to the returning loser at WrestleMania 31. Having said that, had Taker not been shockingly taken to Suplex City by the vicious former UFC heavyweight champion, then fans would have also been robbed of the eternal gift that is shocked Undertaker guy. And who wants to live in that world, eh? Bret Hart didn't sign with WCW and wasn't screwed in Montreal. The night a WCW-bound Bret Hart was horrendously screwed out of his WWE Championship by Vince McMahon and his pals in Montreal ultimately led to arguably the greatest era in company history. In the wake of that jaw-dropping Survivor Series 1997 conclusion, the despicable Mr. McMahon character was born. Stone Cold Steve Austin was given the perfect heel figure to clash with as he continued his rise to the top of the industry, and WWE eventually conquered their Atlanta rivals in the Monday Night Wars. But would all of those things have been guaranteed had Bret stayed put in WWE, and without that dreadful trick in Montreal? For one thing, Hart would have likely continued to be one of the company's top stars, and not had his own legendary career brought to a screeching halt thanks to a sickening Goldberg boot. And while WWE certainly had begun leaning towards a more attitude-filled product in the time leading up to that infamous Hart vs. Shawn Michaels fight, it was the controversial Montreal screwjob that really ignited the era that would ultimately transform the likes of Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley, and Triple H into genuine superstars. Who knows if there'd even still be a WWE without that night in Montreal? John Cena doesn't rap at the back of a bus. The GOAT that is John Cena may have gotten off to a decent start with his instantly iconic Ruthless Aggression showdown with Kurt Angle back in 2002, but things weren't actually looking all that great a few months later. In fact, it got to the point where a rather bland Cena was actually told that he'd likely be getting released before the end of that same year. And if it wasn't for one particular bus journey during a European tour, there's a good chance the champ wouldn't have been here for much longer. After impressing Stephanie McMahon with his rapping skills during that trip, it wasn't long before Cena was handed a mic to spit rhymes on SmackDown each and every week. But what if Cena didn't pluck up the courage to make up a freestyle rap about tuna fish that day on the bus? You certainly would not have been able to see him, that's for sure. WWE would have been without their ridiculously popular poster boy from 2005 to 2017, Make-A-Wish Records would not have been smashed, and a certain faction may have gone on to become bona fide superstars too. And speaking of which, the Nexus won at SummerSlam. Just a few short months after tearing apart the ring and obliterating the face that runs the place, the exciting young Nexus faction had their momentum brought to a sudden halt, courtesy of the man who cannot be seen. According to the likes of Wade Barrett, Edge, and Chris Jericho though, the original planned finish for the hotly anticipated WWE vs. Nexus multi-person SummerSlam 2010 main event would have involved the villainous newcomers going over, very much establishing them as a force to be reckoned with early on. That never came to pass, of course, with Cena and WWE higher-ups instead feeling the story needed the visual of the poster boy battering Nexus remaining members, ending the night on an apparent happy note. If Super Cena and Vince McMahon had listened to those behind the scenes telling them how big of an opportunity they were stupidly missing by having the former go over the heels, a number of potential much-needed new main event players could have been born that night. Barrett in particular would have felt like a star to be taken seriously going forward had he been the last man standing that night. And the cocky units could have continued growing as performers and dominating the main roster until an inevitable high-profile implosion down the line. Instead, each member of the promising group never really recovered from one of the dumbest finishes in WWE history. Stone Cold didn't hurt his neck. In the wake of having his neck accidentally injured by the late Owen Hart at SummerSlam 1997, Steve Austin was forced to undergo surgery a few years later, before eventually having to call time on his legendary run at the age of just 38, due to that injury and a few others in 2003. Though he would eventually return for one more gripping match with Kevin Owens 19 years later at WrestleMania 38, of course. Still surreal. And while that bad neck did ultimately force a change in style to more of a brawler, something that definitely complemented his badass anti-hero character, the time he spent on the sidelines due to it actually also gave the likes of The Rock, Chris Jericho, and Triple H the chance to really make an impact at the top of the card. So in a world where Austin never found himself on the receiving end of a dodgy piledriver, perhaps those aforementioned performers wouldn't have had the opportunity to evolve into real superstars. But that alternate version of WWE history could have also possibly seen the bionic redneck continuing to lead the company and raising hell at a high level in between the ropes well into his 40s. And you'll struggle to find a single soul alive who wouldn't let out a big ol' hell yeah at the thought of another few years of Stone Cold whooping ass in his prime. What could have been, eh? And finally, the pandemic era never happened. WWE was actually surprisingly changed for the better during that often horrendous, unexpected, and unpredictable spell in human history. Sensing that those in desperate need of entertaining around the world would likely struggle to sit through a whopping 7+ hours of crowdless WrestleMania content, not long after the planet had been shut down, and wanting to reduce the amount of folks backstage during these scary COVID-19 times, WWE made the wise call to split the show of shows into a 2-night epic. Maybe there's a chance WWE would have eventually realized just how much of a slog the WrestleMania experience had become, without the pandemic forcing them to seriously rethink their biggest show of the year. But it's more likely one-night sports entertainment marathons would have remained. Cinematic classics like the Boneyard Fight and Firefly Funhouse Battle most likely wouldn't have been creatively born either, with the dead man probably just limping around Raymond James Stadium instead. And if Roman Reigns didn't choose to step away from the company due to this unprecedented situation, would the tribal chief at the head of the wrestling table today have even made its way into the WWE universe? Maybe the big dog would still be feeding his rivals pedigree chunks today. Put simply, the pandemic era wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, of course, but there were certainly some silver linings to be found. And that's our list of any other what-if scenarios that would have transformed WWE history. Well, you let me know all about them in the comment section right down below, and don't forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button while you're down there. Also, if you love this kind of stuff, then please head on over to whatculture.com and find some more wonderful articles just like the one this video you're watching right now is based on. I've been Gareth from What Culture Wrestling. Thank you as always for watching this lovely video today. Hopefully we'll see you again rather soon, but in the meantime, just be good to yourself. Bye bye!